The story begins not in chaos but in quiet despair. A night sky heavy with rain draped over the city as an ambulance roared through the empty streets, red lights flashing against windows and wet pavement. Inside the Thompson estate, a world far removed from such storms, silence was the loudest sound. The boy, Marcus Thompson, just 12 years old, lay motionless on a bed surrounded by the finest medical equipment money could buy. Monitors beeped rhythmically, displaying numbers that seemed reassuring but hid a deadly truth no one could yet name. The son of one of the wealthiest men in the city, Marcus had everything he could ever want, everything except an answer. His lips were pale blue, his breathing shallow, his once bright eyes flickering between consciousness and confusion. Bo Thompson, his father, stood helplessly by the bedside, clutching his son's small hand as though sheer will could keep him alive. A man accustomed to power and control, Bo had built empires from dust, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and commanded boardrooms full of powerful people. But in this room, beneath the soft hum of machines, he was powerless. The doctors and specialists he'd flown in from across the country had run every test imaginable: blood work, scans, toxicology panels, and neurological exams. Everything returned normal, perfectly normal. Yet Marcus was dying. Each passing hour drained the color from his face and the hope from his father's eyes. The lead doctor finally whispered what no one dared to say aloud. "We don't know what's happening. We're losing him." Across town, in a part of the city that never made it into business magazines or charity galas, Kamryn Brooks was finishing her night shift at County General Hospital. The fluorescent lights above her flickered as she wrung out a mop, humming quietly to herself to fill the silence. She was 26, practical, and invisible, or so it often felt. A cleaner in one of the city's oldest hospitals, she spent her nights scrubbing hallways, wiping down waiting room chairs, and clearing away the remnants of people's pain. She didn't mind the work. It was steady, honest, but sometimes, in the still hours before dawn, she remembered another life, the one she'd almost had. She'd once been an environmental engineering student before tragedy and financial hardship forced her to leave school. As she rolled her mop bucket down the hall, the small TV mounted near the nurse's station caught her attention. The news anchor's voice carried across the empty corridor. Breaking news: the son of real estate billionaire Bo Thompson remains in critical condition tonight. Doctors are baffled by the mysterious illness causing oxygen deprivation and blue discoloration. Symptoms worsen at night, despite normal test results. Kamryn froze. Her hands tightened around the mop handle as the words replayed in her mind: oxygen deprivation, blue lips, worsening at night. She had heard those symptoms before. In fact, she had lived them. 5 years earlier, her younger brother, Danny, had died in their small apartment from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by a faulty generator. He had the same symptoms: confusion, headaches, pale lips that deepened to blue. The hospital at the time hadn't realized the cause until it was too late. The memory hit her like a cold wave. Her brother's body, still warm, the faint smell of exhaust in the air. She had vowed never to forget that night. And now, hearing the newscaster's words, she knew exactly what was happening to the boy in that mansion. Heart pounding, Kamryn grabbed a sheet of paper from her cleaning cart and scribbled a note: check carboxyhemoglobin levels, possible carbon monoxide poisoning, inspect heating systems or pool heater, CO leak possible. She didn't stop to think about what she was doing or whether anyone would believe her. She just knew she couldn't do nothing. She changed out of her uniform, threw on her worn gray coat, and caught the last city bus heading toward the Upper District. By the time she arrived at Thompson Memorial Hospital, it was close to midnight. Rain had turned the sidewalks into rivers, and her shoes were soaked through. The hospital gleamed like a glass palace, pristine, guarded, and unwelcoming to someone like her. Inside, the lobby buzzed with reporters and hospital staff. But no one paid attention to the woman with damp hair and tired eyes holding a folded note in her trembling hands. She approached the reception desk, her voice shaking but urgent as she explained she needed to deliver a message to the boy's doctors. The receptionist glanced at her clothing, her hesitation evident. Kamryn insisted, her voice rising, "Please. You don't understand. He's being poisoned. He doesn't have a mystery illness, it's carbon monoxide." The receptionist forced a polite smile and said she would pass it along, But as Kamryn turned to leave, she saw the woman drop the note onto the trash beside her desk. Her chest tightened. She had seen that same disbelief before, when she'd begged doctors to test her brother, when she'd been told she was overreacting. She walked back out into the storm, the weight of helplessness pressing on her chest. Across the street, she sat on a cold bench, raindrops sliding down her face as she looked up at the hospital windows glowing against the night. Somewhere in there, a boy was dying, and the answer was right in front of them. She thought of Danny, his laughter, the way he used to promise her they'd make it out of their small apartment one day. She closed her eyes and whispered into the rain, "Not again, not this time." She didn't know how yet, but she made herself a promise as thunder rolled above her. She would make them listen. Rain slicked the streets in a blur of amber and red light as the city seemed to hold its breath. Inside a sprawling mansion on the hill, a boy no older than 12 lay beneath linen sheets that did nothing to warm him. His chest rose in shallow, irregular breaths. Machines hummed and beeped in rhythm, as if mocking the panic around them. The monitors claimed he was fine, oxygen steady, pulse stronger, but anyone with eyes could see that wasn't true. His lips were tinged blue, his eyelids fluttered as though fighting sleep he might never wake from. Bo Thompson, the billionaire developer whose name was engraved on half the city's skyline, stood beside the bed trying to look like a man in control. He wasn't. The doctors he had flown in from across the country had turned the room into a sterile command post, charts, wires, whispering specialists, yet the diagnosis remained empty. One called it idiopathic hypoxia, another suggested an autoimmune reaction. None of it made sense. Each passing hour drained color from the boy's face and hope from his father's eyes. For a man used to buying solutions, this was the first problem money couldn't touch. Across town, far from the world of marble floors and private physicians, the night janitor at County General Hospital dragged her mop across the tiled floor. Kamryn Brooks moved with a rhythm learned from long shifts and little sleep. The scent of disinfectant clung to her hands. A television in the waiting area murmured background noise until a breaking news alert cut through the static. Real estate magnate Bo Thompson's son remains in critical condition with a mysterious illness baffling doctors. Kamryn's hand froze mid-motion. The anchor's voice continued, describing the symptoms: headaches, confusion, bluish lips that worsened at night. Each word struck her like a flashback. She remembered her brother Danny, 14 years old, gone in a single night that still haunted her dreams. He'd come home from football practice complaining of dizziness. By morning, he was cold to the touch. The coroner called it carbon monoxide poisoning from a broken generator. The symptoms were the same, identical: blue lips, clear lungs, normal tests until the final breath. Kamryn's heart began to race. She knew exactly what was happening to that boy in the mansion. Her mop clattered to the floor as she scribbled a note on the back of a supply receipt. Check carboxyhemoglobin levels. Inspect heating or pool systems. CO poisoning possible. It wasn't elegant, but it was urgent. She grabbed her coat and hurried through the rain toward the last bus leaving downtown. Her co-workers called after her, but she didn't stop. Every minute mattered. She couldn't let another child die because people didn't listen. When she arrived at the gleaming Fatilda Section 8 of Thompson Memorial Hospital, her reflection stared back from the glass door. Saw a young woman soaked, exhausted, invisible. The lobby smelled of luxury, polished marble, designer flowers, a soft hum of quiet wealth. She approached the front desk and handed over her crumpled note, explaining between breaths that it was important, that it could save the boy's life. The receptionist gave a tight, practiced smile, glanced at her worn shoes, and said she'd make sure the doctors got it. Kamryn stepped aside, relieved for a brief, fragile moment until she saw the paper dropped casually into the trash. Her stomach turned. The same thing had happened 5 years ago when she begged doctors to test Danny for CO poisoning. They'd brushed her off, said she was panicking, said tests cost money. By the time they believed her, it was too late. The memory flooded back, raw and unbearable. She left the building and sank onto a bench across the street, rain running down her hair, her jeans heavy with water. Through the wide hospital windows, she could see silhouettes moving: nurses, doctors, a father pacing. She pressed her hands together, whispering to no one, "Please, just test him. Don't make me watch this again." Thunder rolled in the distance, echoing the pounding in her chest. She thought of Danya, his lopsided grin, the smell of motor oil on his hands, the way he'd promised he'd buy her a house one day so she'd never have to clean again. The grief still lived inside her, carved deep and silent, but this night felt different. She could feel that same choice standing before her again: stay quiet, or fight to be heard. She rose from the bench, trembling but certain. The hospital loomed across the street like a fortress, but she wasn't afraid of locked doors anymore. Somewhere in there, a child was slipping away while experts argued over impossible explanations. She didn't have credentials or influence, but she had Trada and truth. She had learned, could save a life if someone just dared to speak it loud enough. The hospital corridors were silent except for the soft hum of machinery and the muted shuffle of shoes on polished tile. It was the kind of silence that carried tension, a one born not from peace but from fear. Inside the pediatric ICU, the doctors continued their work with practiced precision, their faces drawn tight, their voices reduced to murmurs. Marcus Thompson's condition hadn't improved, and the medical team was running out of explanations. They adjusted ventilator settings, recalibrated monitors, and whispered about rare diseases that might explain his symptoms, but none of it added up. Every time the boy's oxygen level dropped, it sent a jolt of panic through the room, yet every test kept coming back clear. In another part of the hospital, Kamryn Brooks was pacing the cold marble floor of the lobby. Her hair was still damp, her hands trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. She had tried, really tried, to get someone to listen. The receptionist's indifference still stung, but what hurt more was the familiar sense of invisibility, the same feeling that had followed her for years since she left school, since she became just a janitor. But the truth didn't care about titles. The symptoms were too specific, too familiar. The boy wasn't dying of some unknown disease. He was dying from something invisible, something silent, something that filled the air he breathed. For a long moment, she stood by the window watching the rain slide down the glass, wondering if she should just go home. Who would listen to her? What power did she have to challenge doctors with advanced degrees and billionaires who could command entire hospitals? But then she thought of Danny Agana, her little brother's small hands, his laughter, and the way she'd felt helpless watching his body grow cold. The guilt she had carried for years surged through her veins, pushing away fear. She couldn't walk away this time. She had nothing left to lose. Kamryn found a side corridor where a service door was propped open. Her years cleaning hospitals had taught her their layouts intimately, the hidden routes where staff came and went unnoticed, the tunnels connecting wards. Moving quietly, she slipped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't sure what she planned to do, she only knew she had to see someone who mattered. When she reached the intensive care wing, she caught a glimpse of the boy through the glass panel of his room. His small chest rose and fell beneath the blankets, his lips faintly blue even under the fluorescent lights. There was a cluster of specialists around him, their faces a mixture of concentration and defeat. Kamryn's eyes met those of one nurse who was stepping out, a tired-looking woman with a kind face. Gathering her courage, Kamryn spoke quickly, explaining that she recognized the symptoms, that she had seen this before. The nurse hesitated, torn between protocol and compassion, but something in Kamryn's voice, steady despite her exhaustion, made her pause. She led Kamryn a few steps down the hallway, away from the others, and listened. Kamryn spoke about carbon monoxide poisoning, about how normal oxygen monitors couldn't detect it because they measured saturation, not content. She explained the tests needed to confirm it, the carboxyhemoglobin levels that would reveal the truth. The nurse didn't dismiss her outright. She was cautious, skeptical, but curious. That would be rare, she said slowly. Almost impossible here. This hospital is new, state of the art. Kamryn nodded. Maybe. But you said he gets worse at night, right? That's exactly when CO levels rise in enclosed spaces. The nurse frowned, unsure what to do, but before she could respond, the door behind them opened and Bo Thompson stepped out. He looked drained, the weight of sleepless nights visible in his eyes. At first, he didn't notice Kamryn standing there, but when the nurse mentioned her theory, he turned sharply. His voice was low but controlled. "Who are you?" he asked. Kamryn swallowed hard. "My name's Kamryn Brooks. I don't work here. I'm a cleaner at County General, but I studied environmental engineering before I dropped out. I've seen this before. Me and my brother died from it." There was a pause long enough to make her doubt every word she'd just spoken. Beau's expression was unreadable, his jaw tense. Beside him, one of his executive assets, a polished woman named Lydia, laughed quietly, dismissively. "You're suggesting our son is poisoned by carbon monoxide in a hospital? That's ridiculous." But Kamryn didn't waver. She repeated her explanation, this time slower, methodical. She described how pulse oximeters couldn't distinguish between oxygen and carbon monoxide, how the symptoms perfectly matched exposure. She even mentioned where the source might be: an indoor pool heater, a faulty vent, a blocked exhaust. The nurse's eyes widened slightly. It was plausible. The details were too specific to ignore. Beau looked at the nurse, then at Kamryn. His voice softened. "If she's wrong, we lose an hour," he said. "If she's right." A broken bar. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The nurse nodded, already reaching for the phone to order a blood gas test. Lydia began to protest, muttering about lawsuits and reputation, but Beau cut her off sharply. "Do the test." Kamryn stepped back as the medical team moved quickly. Her heart pounded as she watched through the window, uncertainty gripping her. What if she was wrong? What if the years of grief had clouded her judgment? But deep down, she knew she wasn't mistaken. The look in that boy's face, the same faded blue, the same slow drift into unconsciousness. It was a memory carved into her. When the results came back, the room went still. The lead doctor glanced at Beau, his voice barely above a whisper. "Carboxyhemoglobin levels a broken bar, 32%. It's carbon monoxide poisoning." Kamryn's knees nearly gave out. She leaned against the wall, tears welling in her eyes. Relief, exhaustion, vindication, all of it hit at once. Inside the room, doctors rushed to start treatment, attaching oxygen masks, preparing hyperbaric therapy. And as color slowly began to return to the boy's cheeks, Beau turned toward Kamryn. The look in his eyes had changed completely. It was the look of a man who had just realized that the quiet woman standing before him had saved his son's life. "You said, expand part 2 on 700 words without scenes and headings," ChatGPT said. The sterile chill of the hospital hung heavy in the air, a quiet tension that even the hum of machines couldn't break. Marcus Thompson's condition was deteriorating, and the team of specialists surrounding him were grasping at straws. Every scan, every test, and every new theory ended in frustration. The boy's oxygen levels continued to plummet while his heart fought to keep rhythm, and his father, Beau Thompson, watched helplessly as the finest doctor's money could buy offered nothing but uncertain explanations. His fortune, his status, his influence, all of it was useless in the face of a problem that refused to be named. Every time the machines beeped in warning, Beau's hope dimmed a little more. Outside those walls, Kamryn Brooks paced the hospital lobby, her heart racing as she debated what to do next. Her note had been ignored, tossed in the trash like it was nothing, but the conviction burning inside her wouldn't let her walk away. She knew those symptoms too well. They weren't just familiar, they were haunting. Every memory of her brother's final hours replayed in vivid detail, each echoing moment reminding her that silence had cost her too much already. Her life since that night had been one long act of survival, not redemption, but this felt different. If she stayed quiet now, she'd be. The truth arrived like a thunderclap that shattered every illusion of control. When Dr. Nair entered the private waiting room, her expression alone told the story before her words did. The carbon monoxide levels in Marcus Thompson's blood were dangerously high, so high that it was a miracle the boy had even survived this long. Beau Thompson's world tilted as he heard the confirmation. All the money, the doctors, the cutting-edge technology, and none of it had seen what a single, unseen janitor from another hospital had recognized from the start. In that instant, every assumption he had ever made about who mattered and whose voice deserved to be heard came crashing down. The corporate hierarchy that had always protected people like Lydia Crane suddenly looked like a fragile lie. Kamryn sat in stunned silence, her hands trembling as the weight of it sank in. Relief flooded through her chest, chased immediately by grief. She had been right, but being right didn't erase the years of pain, the memory of her brother gasping for air in a small apartment while adults ignored her pleas. Across the room, Bo turned to her, voice rough from emotion he couldn't hide. He didn't see a janitor anymore. He saw the woman who had saved his son's life when the world refused to listen. "Tell me what we do next," he said simply. The authority that usually filled his voice was gone. What remained was trust. Kamryn steadied herself, forcing her emotions aside. "He needs high-flow oxygen right now," she said. "Then get him to a hyperbaric chamber fast. That's the only way to force the carbon monoxide out of his system before it's too late." Without hesitation, Bo repeated her orders, and suddenly the room was alive with motion. Doctors, nurses, and technicians who had once dismissed her were now following her lead. For the first time, power bent to truth. But even as they worked, alarms screamed from Marcus's monitor. His body convulsed, his heart faltering under the weight of invisible poison. The pulse oximeter still read normal, its numbers mocking the reality of his collapse. Kamryn's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "It's lying to you. That reading's falsy. His blood is still starved of oxygen. Get the mask on him now." Her tone carried no hesitation, and Dr. Nair, now fully convinced, followed her command. Within moments, oxygen flooded Marcus's system, and color slowly crept back into his face. The line on the heart monitor steadied, the erratic rhythm evening into something almost peaceful. The ambulance ride to the hyperbaric center was a blur of sirens and urgency. Bo sat with his son, holding his hand, his gaze shifting to Kamryn again and again as if trying to reconcile the reality before him. She looked exhausted, her soaked scrubs clinging to her frame, her hair disheveled, but her eyes burned with purpose. "I judged you," he said quietly, voice almost drowned by the siren's wail. "I thought you didn't belong in that room, but you saw what we couldn't." Kamryn didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus, the faint rise and fall of his chest the only thing that mattered. Finally, she spoke softly. "Just make sure he gets to see another sunrise. That's all I ever wanted for my brother." Hours passed before the crisis stabilized. Marcus lay in the hyperbaric chamber, his breathing even and color restored. The doctors called it a miracle, but Bo knew it wasn't divine intervention, it was human courage, born from pain and persistence. When he stepped out into the waiting area, Kamryn sat there, shoulders slumped, exhaustion written across every inch of her face. In her lap rested the maintenance report Rosa had delivered, the evidence that someone had known about the danger days before. When Bo read the initials LC, his stomach turned. Lydia Crane, the same woman who had dismissed Kamryn's warning and belittled her for even daring to speak. He looked up, meeting Kamryn's gaze. "You saved my son," he said, voice breaking slightly. "But you also saved me from myself. I built towers, but I never built space to listen." News of the revelation spread quickly. The press called it negligence, the lawyers called it criminal, and the board called for immediate action. But none of the labels captured the full story, the mortal one, the human one. In that hospital, amid polished marble and whispered power, the girl who once scrubbed floors had changed the course of lives. Her act wasn't grand or loud, it was steady, quiet, and fueled by a promise to never let another person die because their truth was inconvenient. Bo promised accountability. Lydia Crane was removed within hours, and an investigation was launched. But the real shift happened deeper than Policia. It happened in the way people began to look at one another. Doctors spoke differently to cleaning staff. Technicians asked questions they might have ignored before. In the hallways of that once impenetrable institution, humility became contagious. As dawn broke outside the hospital, Kamryn stood by the window, watching the first streaks of sunlight pierce the gray horizon. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like the girl whose warnings were dismissed or whose knowledge was worthless. She felt seen, and not because she had proven others wrong, but because she had proven that doing the right thing mattered, even when the world refused to notice. Behind her, Bo approached quietly. "He's going to be okay," he said. Kamryn nodded, eyes still fixed on the sunrise. "Good," she whispered. "He'll get to see Ida every morning. That's all that matters."